May 1st, 1943. Somewhere over the English Channel, a B-17 Flying Fortress is tearing itself apart from the inside. Two separate fires are burning through the fuselage. The radio room is gone. The tail section is moments away from failing. 3 members of the crew have already bailed out. One of them never even made it past the stabilizer. The others are wounded, panicking, and the plane is barely holding altitude. And the man left standing, the one guy who didn't run, was someone the rest of the crew couldn't even stand. This is the story of Maynard Harrison Smith, the town troublemaker from Michigan, who became one of the most decorated airmen of World War II on the very first mission he ever flew. Let's rewind about a year. August of 1942. A 31-year-old man walks into a U.S. Army recruitment office. Now, the average enlistee at this point was somewhere around 21 or 22 years old. This guy was a decade older than most of them, and at 5'4", several inches shorter too. His name was Maynard Harrison Smith, and his background was, to put it charitably, colorful. By the time he enlisted, Smith had already been married and divorced twice. There are local newspaper records showing his second wife filing for separation on the grounds of cruelty and non-support, dated just 3 days after he signed up. And there's a persistent story, one that fits almost too well, that Smith had been hauled in front of a judge over unpaid child support and was given a stark choice: jail time or the Army. Reportedly, he was still in handcuffs when the local paper photographed him heading off to serve. Whether the cuff story is entirely true, nobody can say for certain, but everything else about it sounds exactly like Maynard Smith. The Army, perhaps not knowing what it had gotten itself into, funneled him into aviation training. By early 1943, he was enrolled in the Army Air Force's instruction program at the University of Minnesota. He qualified as a gunner and was assigned to the ball turret, the cramped, exposed sphere mounted underneath a B-17 that rotated to track enemy fighters attacking from below. It was, in many ways, the perfect job for a 5'4" man with nothing to lose. Act 2. Nobody liked him. Smith was assigned to the 306th Bomb Group, stationed at Thurley in England. The 306th flew the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, one of the most iconic aircraft of the war. Tough, durable, and capable of absorbing punishment that would have destroyed lesser planes. But when Smith arrived at his new unit, it wasn't the B-17s that were struggling to absorb punishment. It was everyone around him. His fellow airmen sized him up quickly. He was stubborn. He had a short fuse. He didn't get along with people, and he didn't particularly try to. The nickname they gave him was Snuffy, borrowed from a comic strip character of the time known for being a cranky, disagreeable mountain man. It wasn't a term of affection. Because of this, Smith spent 6 weeks sitting on the ground while others flew. No crew wanted him. No one was rushing to hand this guy a position on their aircraft. But eventually, a first mission was assigned. The date was May 1st, 1943. The target was the submarine pens at Saint-Nazaire, France, a port so heavily defended by anti-aircraft batteries that crews had taken to calling it Flak City. Act 3. The mission. The route to Saint-Nazaire was deliberately complicated. American mission planners never flew straight lines to a target. Doing so would have telegraphed their destination to German interceptors and sent bombers directly over the most dangerous flat corridors. Instead, the flight paths zigzagged across the sky, threading between known threats. Smith's aircraft, B-17 number 649, flown by a veteran captain named Lewis Johnson, was positioned at the lowest point in the entire group formation, the most exposed slot. Johnson was a seasoned pilot on his final mission of his tour. For Smith, it was his first. The outbound leg went surprisingly smoothly. The skies near Saint-Nazaire were overcast, which blunted the bombing accuracy significantly. Most of the bombs landed in the water rather than on the target. But the famous flak defenses were having an off day too, and the 306th Bomb Group turned away from the target without losing a single plane. Then they headed out over the Atlantic for the long trip home. And that's when everything started to go wrong. Act 4. Brest. At the front of the formation, the group commander, Lieutenant Colonel Claude Putnam, was dealing with a quiet crisis. The radio compass and navigation equipment on his lead aircraft had failed. Without reliable navigation over open water, with no landmarks and enemy jamming disrupting radio aids, his navigator estimated they were closer to England than they actually were. Putnam brought the formation down to below 5,000 feet in preparation for approach and landing, then lower still, under 1,000 feet as the coastline appeared on the horizon. The coast got closer, and then the flak opened up. It wasn't England, it was Brest, one of the most heavily fortified port cities in occupied France, home to German naval forces, coastal artillery batteries, and fighter squadrons. The 306th Bomb Group was now at roughly 800 feet of altitude, throttled back to landing speed, flying directly over one of the most dangerous targets in Western Europe. German anti-aircraft guns and naval patrol boats opened up from below. At that altitude and that speed, they could hardly miss. German FW-190 fighters, among the best interceptors in the Luftwaffe, were scrambled and immediately dove on the low, slow formation like hawks on pigeons. The lowest aircraft in the entire group was, of course, B-17-649. In rapid succession, 2 B-17s from the 306th went down. One was destroyed outright, killing all 10 men aboard. A second made it as far as the harbor before ditching in the water. Putnam recognized the catastrophic error and immediately swung the formation back out over the Atlantic, but the damage was done. The fighters, with full fuel tanks, continued pressing their attacks for another 20 miles out to sea. Act 5. Fire. Aboard aircraft 649, the FW-190s had found their mark. The ball turret went dead, communications cut, electrical systems gone. Smith hand-cranked the turret back into position and climbed out into the fuselage. What he found was a plane that was actively dying. The radio room was engulfed in flame. A second fire had broken out near the tail wheel. Heavy smoke was filling the aircraft. As he took in the scene, the radio operator staggered out of the burning radio room, ran straight for the waste hatch, and threw himself out. He disappeared into the channel below without a life vest. It appeared to have burned away. The man hit the horizontal stabilizer on the way down and never made it back. The right waist gunner had already bailed. The left waist gunner was in the process of doing the same, halfway through the hatch, stuck, unable to get out. Smith pulled him back inside, helped him reach the rear escape door, and watched him go. That left Smith, the pilot and co-pilot up front, and somewhere back in the tail section, a tail gunner named Gibson who hadn't made a sound. Smith wrapped a piece of clothing around his face to filter the smoke, grabbed a fire extinguisher, and went to work on the radio room blaze. But before he could make headway, a returning FW-190 made another pass. Smith sprinted to one of the waist guns and opened fire as the fighter swept underneath, then crossed to the other gun to track it on the way out. The fighter pulled off. Back to the fire. He fought his way into the radio room itself this time, throwing burning debris out through the holes the fire had already burned through the fuselage walls. When the extinguisher ran dry, he grabbed a water bottle and used that. When the water was gone, he used the only liquid he had left. Then he kept going with his hands and feet until his clothing started to catch. Between each round with the fires, he was making his way back to the tail section because Gibson was still back there, and Gibson was badly wounded. The tail gunner had been hit in the back, the round likely passing through his lung. Smith administered morphine, positioned the man on his side to keep the wound from draining, and did his best to keep him calm. Every few minutes, he leaned over and told the wounded man they were almost home, almost over England, just a few more minutes. It would be another 45 minutes before that was actually true. From a nearby B-17 watching the whole scene, the crew could see the small figure inside the stricken fortress, head bobbing, moving between positions, heaving debris out through the burning walls, dropping flat on the floor to gasp for air, then getting back up again. They watched the tail of the aircraft dragging down as the pilot fought for control. They watched Smith throw out guns, ammunition, and equipment piece by piece to reduce weight enough to keep the plane in the air. The fire reached the ammunition boxes at one point, and 50 caliber shells began cooking off inside the fuselage before he could get to them. He kept going.
Act 6. The Landing. Captain Johnson found the first available runway in England, Port Treath Air Base, and put the aircraft down. Almost immediately after it touched down, the B-17 broke in half on the runway. 7 men walked away. The 3 who had bailed out over the Atlantic were never found. Maynard Smith stepped off that aircraft with burned hands, smoldering clothes, and a parachute pack that, when he checked it later, had stopped a .30 caliber round that would have killed him. He'd taken it off during the firefighting to move more freely, but had put it back on at some point during the chaos without realizing it had likely just saved his life. Act 7. The Aftermath. The official investigation into the navigation error was blunt. The post-mission report pointed directly to faulty compass equipment and the impossibility of relying on radio navigation over France, where the Germans had set up jamming stations and decoy signals specifically designed to throw Allied bombers off course. Putnam himself signed the report, and he did not spare himself in describing the navigation as falling short of exceptional. As for Smith, within days, he was recommended for the Congressional Medal of Honor. The ceremony, however, was pure Snuffy Smith. On the day the Secretary of War, Henry Stimson, arrived to personally drape the Medal of Honor around Smith's neck, with a gallery of generals standing behind him, Smith was in the kitchen. He'd been put on KP duty, peeling potatoes, as punishment for repeatedly showing up late to briefings. They pulled him off latrine duty for the ceremony and put the nation's highest military honor around his neck, while Lieutenant Generals saluted him. Then they sent him back. A reporter who covered the ceremony, a young writer named Andy Rooney, who would go on to become one of the most recognizable faces in American television, captured it perfectly. The men on base, Rooney wrote, still hadn't quite made up their minds about Smith. He was a character, they said. That was the safest thing anyone could say about him. Smith flew only 4 more combat missions after May 1st, before being grounded for what was recorded as combat stress reaction. He was later demoted to private for poor job performance, a reduction in rank that somehow coexisted with the Medal of Honor around his neck. When he finally returned home to Cairo, Michigan in early 1945, the town threw him a parade. He was their bad boy who had become a hero, and they weren't quite sure what to make of that either. Maynard Snuffy Smith passed away in 1984 at the age of 72.
Here's what stays with me about this story. Nobody wanted Snuffy Smith on their plane. He was difficult, abrasive, stubborn, and couldn't follow a simple rule to save his life. He'd been in trouble with the law through 2 failed marriages and was almost certainly in the army under duress. His own crew barely knew him. And when the moment came, when the plane was on fire and people were jumping and the odds were impossible, he was the only one who stayed. Not because he was fearless, not because he was some kind of trained hero, but because it needed to be done and he was the one still standing. Sometimes history picks the strangest people to do the most important things. If you found this story worth your time, leave a like and subscribe. There are plenty more stories just like this one waiting to be told.